Hey there, friends and viewers. You have clicked on the Feral Druid patch 4.2 changes. Welcome. Here we go. The first change on the PTR patch notes read, the Druids will now gain 1 attack power per point of strength, down from 2. They continue to gain 2 attack power per point of agility while in cat form or bear form. This is an interesting change because it's been like this ever since the beginning of World of Warcraft. Reason being is the Feral Druid specialization is the only spec in the game that is capable of fulfilling 2 completely different roles. First of them being melee DPS, the second being a tank spec. So naturally, with tank gear itemized for plate tanks in the past, it became necessary for bears to generate 2 points of attack power per point of strength, similar to a prot warrior, because after all, that's what they've been based on up until now. So ultimately, this has caused some problems for Blizzard. I mean, bear gear in particular has not been scaling the way they'd hoped. In fact, Feral Druid bear tank specs are dealing more damage than Blizzard expected with heroic raiding gear and such in patch 4.1. In fact, more damage than DPS classes are dealing, and they're not comfortable with that. Not comfortable with the amount of damage and subsequently the amount of threat. So they have officially changed it so that every agility-based class in the game now only generates 1 point of attack power per point of strength. Sad face, because previously this caused feral cats, for instance, to have extremely enormous attack pools. I mean, attack power pools with the extra points generated from strength, as well as feral attack power, which used to be on all of our staves and pikes and such. And now both of those things are gone. So feral DPS now has a regular attack power pool, but still deals damage similar to the way that they used to. Ultimately, this doesn't really affect our damage because changes have also been made to rectify the change through weapon damage as well as attack power scaling to justify the loss of attack power we'll be gaining. But as you can see here, my toon has 96 strength with Mark of the Wild active, and that's I don't stack strength at all. I don't even have a single point of strength on my gear, I don't believe. That's just primary attributes. So that value will effectively be cut in half in patch 4.2. You can see that it generates 172 attack power total, and now losing half of that attack power, I will have 86 attack power points in patch 4.2 from strength alone. Not a huge change, but given the way that some abilities scale with attack power, it will affect things, which is why a lot of the changes have been made further down this list. So let's continue. Let's take a look at some of the abilities that have been changed. Alright, so the first ability we're going to take a look at is your favorite, Ferocious Bite, that huge nuke that you love seeing those huge numbers with. The change reads, the damage has been increased by 15%. In addition, its base cost has been reduced by 25 energy, and it can use up to an additional 25 energy for a 100% damage increase. Now obviously, that's an overall damage increase. And before, in PvP, when you used this ability, it was kind of a risk taker, It used a ton of energy, and you had to consume like 60 energy in order to deal enough damage for a killing blow on, say, a Holy Paladin or something. But now it's a much more user-friendly ability. You have the option of when to use it. You can have a depleted energy pool and still deal solid damage, or you can use Tiger's Fury right beforehand or pool some energy and bite somebody for a huge amount. So it can be used very effectively for killing blows, even more so than before. In a raid situation, before it was only wise to use a Ferocious Bite if Blood in the Water had been in effect. That means your target had 20% or less HP left, in which case it would refresh your 5-point rip, greatly boosting your damage. But now, depending on the situation the raid boss is in, perhaps they're about to become unhittable, perhaps leaking underground, dispelling your bleeds, what have you. If you have 5 combo points up on your target, it may be a wiser DPS choice overall to Ferocious Bite instead of Rip. And that's a very new phenomenon for Feral Druids. Before, Rip was always the better DPS choice, but we may see that changing now, depending on different strategies. So you can see in this footage here that on patch 4.1 with a 5-point Rip, no trinket procs, no attack power buffs or anything, just Mark of the Wild, I'm biting my target for 34,000 damage. And in patch 4.2, same exact situation, same exact gear. I'm biting for almost 40,000 damage. And it consumes it consumes the same amount of energy, but more variable amounts. Did I mention that there's a glyph of Ferocious Bite that will now heal you per point of extra energy consumed, giving it further utility in a PvP situation. This is a huge boost for Ferocious Bite, and I'm really excited about it. Alright, the next ability we're going to take a look at is the bread and butter of cat damage. You know what I'm talking about. Mangle. It reads that damage at level 80 and above has been increased to 540% weapon damage, up from 460%, but the bonus damage has been lowered to 302. This is a minor adjustment that was made to compensate for the loss of strength, that original 86 attack power from earlier. And the changes were made at level 80 and above so as not to mess with low-level PvP, because as we know, Feral Druids and Rogues and Hunters are running around two-shotting or one-shotting people in low-level PvP, so they have to be very careful with changes to these sorts of abilities. Ultimately, it is a minor decrease in Mangle damage. As you can see, on patch 4.1, I'm hitting a level 85 target dummy for 15,000 damage, and then on patch 4.2, I'm hitting it for about 14,000. All the same exact situation, same buffs, same gear, same everything, same target. So that is a minor decrease, which is going to actually put more of our damage scaling into Shred as opposed to Mangle. So we have to be very careful so as not to waste energy on Mangle now, as we have been in the past, but now it's a more significant difference between Mangle and Shred. Okay, the next damaging ability we're going to take a look at is Rake, the best and most energy efficient bleed in the game, guys. It reads that the initial damage on hit now deals the same damage as each periodic tick and is treated the same for all combat calculations. Let me interject and say that that means the initial hit will also be scaling with Mastery and Mangle debuffs. The periodic damage now gains 14.7% of attack power per tick. Strange numbers here. Up from 12.6%. And the base damage per tick has been lowered from 557 to 56. Basically what that means, guys, is that it scales now more with attack power than it did before, and the initial damage is less. So the better your gear, the harder your Rake is going to hit people. And guys, that's a huge bonus. Before, in patch 4.1, if you apply Rake to somebody, it's going to deal very minuscule amount of damage. On patch 4.1, I'm hitting this dummy for 1,600 damage. And in patch 4.2, I'm hitting it for close to 8. That's what a regular Rip Tick would deal with Mangle and the amount of attack power that I have. So that's a huge buff. Biggest buff that is coming to Druids this patch. It's going to help to increase burst damage in PvP as well as overall damage. Perhaps even using Rake to build combo points because it's so energy efficient. I'm going to have to test that out. Either way, it's a big buff and I'm real happy about it. Next on the list are the changes made to one of my favorite abilities in game. You know what I'm talking about, Ravage. That awesome proc from the Stampede talent that was added in patch 4.0. It reads that Ravage damage at level 80 and above has been increased to 950% weapon damage, up from 850%, and bonus damage has been lowered to 532. This is kind of the opposite of the change made to Mangle. Now it is scaling more so with weapon damage and less with attack power. So trinkets like Unheeded Warning and ultimately the item level of your actual weapon is going to affect Ravage damage more so than anything else in the game. So it doesn't really change the damage output at all. In fact, my calculation showed a slight decrease in damage output from Ravage, which I'm not very worked up about because it's very insignificant. But it just ultimately affects the way that the ability scales with gear, actually making it more dependent on weapon status. And also making those adjustments to level 80 and above so as not to wreck low-level PvP even more than it is. Because, you know, you can pretty much one-shot people with Ravage these days in low-level battlegrounds. Alrighty, the next change is a big one. We're talking about Savage Roar. It reads that Savage Roar now grants 80% increased damage to melee auto attacks, up from 50%. The glyph of Savage Roar remains an unchanged bonus of 5% bonus to that total. So we're looking at 85% bonus increased attack damage to your auto attacks. Static. That's huge, guys. Big buff. Especially in terms of DPS. Not so much on the side of burst damage, but a very large damage increase nonetheless when you add up how many auto attacks you get off in a battle. This actually may inspire me to take Fury swipes because it will really maximize my offense in PvP. And if you're not taking Fury swipes in PvE, you need to do that. So basically now, cat damage overall, regular DPS, no RNG involved, should be much higher because of this change. And it also may inspire you to take the Glyph of Savage Roar if you aren't already. You can see here in patch 4.1, I'm averaging, maybe 3,500 damage on a critical auto attack. And in patch 4.2, I'm hitting for closer to, 4.2, 4.3 thousand damage. It's a very significant change. One of the last big changes for the Feral Druid spec in patch 4.2 are the changes made to Shred, kind of similar to Mangle. It reads that Shred damage at level 80 and above has been increased to 540% weapon damage, up from 450%. The bonus damage has been lowered to 302. Yet again, scaling less with attack power and more with weapon damage. Furthermore, relying on the item level of your actual weapon, as well as any way you can boost your weapon damage. Now, for the sake of this demonstration, I've chosen to show you Shred damage with my Unheeded Warning proc active to really just place an emphasis on how big of a role that weapon damage plays on Shred damage here. So you can see that in patch 4.1 I'm dealing about 27,000 damage, and in patch 4.2 I'm hitting upwards of 30,000. So it's going to be huge in terms of burst damage with the same amount of energy cost. So ultimately you're looking at a very significant DPS increase from Shred, and a large DPS increase overall just based on the majority of these changes. One of the smaller changes, but perhaps more noticeable than others, is that Entangling Roots and the equivalent spell triggered by Nature's Grasp no longer deal damage. Now you may think to yourself, oh, that's a nerf, but in reality it's kind of a buff. Think about it. In the past, Entangling Root damage has done what, like 12 DPS damage per second? But the problem with it is it will break CC. So take an arena match, for example. Say your partner's a mage. He polymorphs a warrior, okay? You see that the polymorph is about to wear off, so you cast your Entangling Roots, and you may get a DOT tick on the warrior, which ends up breaking him out of the polymorph prematurely. That will no longer happen when you cast Entangling Roots on somebody because it no longer deals damage. The same thing can be applied to dungeons or even raiding when you use Entangling Roots to crowd control a melee target. One minor change is the damage differentials from patch 4.1 to 4.2 with regards to Swipe. The change reads that Swipe in cat form now deals 600% weapon damage at level 80 or higher, down from 670. Now, that may sound significant, 70%, but when you take a percentage like 600 and then you deduct 70%, it's not that big of a deal. You can see here in patch 4.1, I'm dealing swipes in the neighborhood of 18 to 20,000 damage, and on patch 4.2 they're 15 to 18. It's not that big of a deal. In fact, I was in a dungeon swiping trash, and I noticed that it was almost as overpowered as it is currently on the live server. So not really a big change, but you will notice a slight DPS decrease in the cat form swipe in patch 4.2. Okay guys, and lastly, the change that I am most excited about are the changes made to Natural Reaction. That's a talent deep in the Feral tree that decreases the damage that you take in bear form. On patch 4.1, it's 12%, but in patch 4.2, it's 18%. That's a solid 6% damage reduction that we're receiving, which is static anytime you go in bear form. I take this talent currently in my PvP build because I like to use bear form to continue my damage in a defensive position as opposed to other kiting strategies that are more popular, and that is really going to make my strategy much more potent. I'm really excited about it, and I expect other people to start taking Natural Reaction in their PvP specs as well, because this is kind of just almost like a static resilience buff anytime you go bear form. Say a frost mage deep freezes you, or you're about to take huge damage, just go bear form. You'll take a lot less damage. That, my friends, concludes our overview of the Feral Druid changes for patch 4.2. Click on the dancing bear to be taken back to the hub so you can check out the balance and the restoration changes as well. This has been Hengest with TGN. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.